Hey, my name is Jade, otherwise known as Backline Nurse. I'm gonna tell you about probably the coolest thing I've ever learned on the internet. And you guys have learned a lot of cool shit on the internet, as I'm sure you have. So I learned all this on Twitter yesterday. First, I'm gonna show you one of my favorite tweets that I've done. I'll put it on the screen here, and I just wanna point out that pretty much every comment I've gotten from a geologist about this tweet is that, yes, it's true. But the thread I saw on Twitter yesterday was so incredible and proved my tweet correct so hard. I have to tell you about it. This is a story about how plankton from the Cretaceous period, millions and millions of years ago, have an influence on elections in the South. Okay, so the Cretaceous period, if you didn't know, is the very last period in the Mesozoic era, which came right after the Jurassic period. At the end of the Cretaceous period, the dinosaurs went extinct. The period took place 145.5 to 65.5 million years ago. During the Cretaceous period, our country was underwater. The planet was much hotter and sea levels were higher. So I'm going to put a picture on the screen of what our country looked like at this time. You can see the Carolinas, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. So you can see right down there in the south what is now known as the Black Belt. There's kind of a coastline, so there would have been beaches there back then. In the shallow water off of the beaches, there were tiny single-celled organisms, and they just floated on the water, collecting sunlight, and when they would die, they would float to the bottom. So that made sediment on the bottom of the water there very, very rich in organic material, and it made kind of a chalk bed. Just a little fun fact about where we are in the current geological timeline. We are currently in the Cenozoic era, which is broken down into 3 different periods. We live in the Quaternary period. The Quaternary period is broken down into the Pleistocene, and the current period, the Holocene. I know what you're thinking. Bon Iver, right? Wait, what's the song? Punches me right in the feelings. I'm like having a whole moment right now. So you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so you get it. Where was I? Okay, yeah, so much of the country was underwater. Fast forward to our current geological period, which we just went over. The planet cooled down, sea levels decreased. That left the geological frame of what we have as our continent right now. But those plankton that were floating in the water and then floated down to the bottom and died, those left the chalk formations that are now in the south. These chalk formations made for extremely rich soil. It made the soil more alkaline, more organic, which in this instance means made from carbon and living matter, makes for very nutrient-rich soil. And the soil was also more porous and darker in color, which is why it is called the Black Belt. So now let's think of what crop was primarily grown in the South. Oh yeah, cotton. So since this was such a great area for growing cotton, plantation owners brought enslaved people from Africa here by the millions. I'll put up a map of cotton production in this area in the 1800s. Looks kind of familiar, huh? So just to summarize, the plankton died, dropped to the bottom, made rich soil, attracted cotton plantation owners, who brought slaves from Africa against their will. But slavery ended a long time ago, so why is there still that blue line there in the South? When slaves were emancipated, many stayed in the area because they didn't know where to go or they didn't have enough money to get there. In the Twitter thread that I'll link, you can read the direct quote from Professor Burtis English about, I think, probably the most profound reason why African Americans didn't leave the South after their emancipation. I'm gonna read it directly. He said, "Why would you leave? That's not just a rhetorical question. You have worked this land. By your toil, others benefited. By your moil, others benefited. Your mother and your father worked this land that others reaped the rewards for. Now that your enslavement is legally over, why would you leave land that grew because of your blood, your sweat, your tears, your family members or other loved ones' lives being lost, when you could perhaps now own it yourself?" That was the divine promise of Reconstruction. Many stayed and continued to pick cotton, but for money. Even after the Great Migration, a lot of these families stayed in the South, and as it's pointed out in that Twitter thread, most African Americans vote, and many vote Democrat, hence the blue line. But he points out that when you get to 1972, the line vanishes. Why would that be? After the emancipation of enslaved people in the South, voter suppression was an incredibly tense issue, and is still an issue today. While today there are more subtle practices in place to suppress the black vote in the South. Back then, things such as poll taxes, literacy tests, and the threat of lynching made voting for African Americans nearly impossible. In 1962, a young man by the name of Jimmy Lee Jackson decided to become an activist after watching his 80-year-old grandfather be turned away when he tried to register to vote. Several years later, Jackson was participating in a peaceful voting rights protest, which turned violent when police began beating protesters. Jackson fled to a nearby cafe where he witnessed police attempt to beat his mother. He naturally intervened, police shot him in the stomach, and he passed away from his injuries 8 days later. What happened to Jimmy Lee Jackson ignited the civil rights movement, or at least threw fuel on the fire that was already beginning. The very next month after Jimmy Lee passed away, the Selma marches took place. Geologists call the ground that they marched on Selma Chalk, which also dates back to the Cretaceous period. As a direct result of these marches, the Voting Rights Act passed in 1965. It was amended again in 1970 and 1975, and after that, the blue line appears and stays. This story to me is not only important because it's just incredibly fascinating, but also because it shows we are not disconnected from the ground upon which we walk every single day. This theory was originally researched by Steve Dutch of University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. I'm going to link to all the research and photo credits in the description of this video. I really hope that you read more about it. It's just so incredibly interesting. I tweeted this in 2015 when I was in Colorado learning about geology and forest fires. It has proven time and time again to be more than just a silly one-off joke and legitimately true. So next time you want to sound like you know what you're talking about, just take a minute, sit back and go, "Ah, yes, because of the rocks." Thanks so much for watching my video. This is my second one. I am so excited to be here teaching you all about weird science and public health. I have a Patreon. Please subscribe if you are able. If you're not, please hit like and subscribe on this video and hit the notification bell to get notifications when I post a new video on my channel. And follow me on Twitter if you want to see more weird jokes of mine that have proven to be correct. Thank you so much, and please be kind to one another.